Okay, so let's begin. Welcome to our first lecture for 2025. A speaker today, can you all hear me first?
Yes, can hear.
Thank you. Our speaker today is Dr. Chaturangi Wickramaratne, who is a researcher in freshwater ecology at the International Water Management Institute. This is a very special place for us because I think it's the only international institute where the headquarters are based in Sri Lanka. Chaturangi has an educational background in aquatic ecosystem management and a decade of expertise in conservation and sustainable development. At IWMI, she leads multiple projects on wetlands, with a particular emphasis on urban and peri-urban wetlands. Her work often intersects with research, policy advocacy, community engagement, and collaborative efforts with state agencies, NGOs, academia, and youth to ensure conservation, restoration, and the wise use of wetland ecosystems. She represents IWMI as its nominated delegate for the Ramsar Convention, and she also serves on the board of Environment Foundation Limited, Sri Lanka. Thank you, Dr. Chaturangi, for agreeing to do this lecture for us. We are all in anticipation, high anticipation to listen to you. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Naka. And thank you to the Sri Lanka Natural History Society for inviting me. I am trying to, okay, so you can see me. I'll just switch on my camera for a little bit. But thank you very much. And I think this opportunity has come at a very relevant time when there's a huge focus on conservation and sustainable development, and wetlands play a huge role in it. So I'm very happy to be here. Let me share my screen, and then you can tell me whether you can see it or not. Okay. So I'll start off with a background to wetlands, and I'm sure the participants here are very familiar with the ecosystem type, but let's try to remind ourselves what they are. They are normally the transitional zone between a permanently wet and a drier zone. They're not either fully water or aquatic habitat, but they also have some characteristics of land as well. And of course, as the name suggests, wetlands, the key feature is that it contains water. And it is estimated that around 6 to 8% of Earth's surface is covered by wetlands, but this can be an underestimate because this is based on best available data from the 1970s onwards, but we don't know much about pre-1970s. So 40% of all animals live or breed in wetlands. So they tend to spend at least some part of their life cycle within wetlands, either for breeding or feeding or for resting, etc. So when we talk about wetlands, sometimes people don't realize that wetlands are water, that they are very essential for our well-being and for our survival. So you're well aware that 75% of Earth's surface is covered by water, but this water is not freely available because most of it is saline water. And only 3% of it is freshwater. And even this freshwater, most of it is in underground or in aquifers, and the surface water is available in rivers, lakes, and swamps, and these are all wetlands. So the water that we can freely access and that's freely available are actually contained within wetlands. So losing wetlands would mean that we will lose water as well. So again, something that's interesting and that has been advancing in terms of science is looking at all of these interconnected ecosystems in the means of hydrological cycle. So obviously we work at the International Water Management Institute. We have a heavy interest in water. And as I said, water means wetlands. So I want to talk a little bit about the hydrological cycle because I feel like this is not talked enough. And there has been recent scientific findings or evidence being built that this is actually a very complex process that's connecting diverse communities and geographies. So hydrological cycle is the basis of all life, and it is about the movement of water above and below the Earth's surface in the form of different states like vapor, liquid, and solid. So the hydrological cycle is basically about the water evaporating and condensing and falling back as precipitation. We all know that. But what are the sources of this moisture or the vapor? So there are two different types, distinct types that can be identified. So one is the green water, which is the water as the precipitation falls. So all the freshwater supplies come from rainfall. And once this rainfall falls on the land, and some of it is infiltrated and absorbed into the ground, and this becomes soil moisture. And this is, again, once evaporated, becomes a source of atmospheric moisture. And the soil moisture also absorbed by plants, they can also transpire, transpiration that results in atmospheric moisture as well. And then you have the precipitation that flows off, that doesn't get infiltrated into the ground, but flows freely as surface flows of surface runoff, which is the water that gets fed into wetlands mainly. But you also have that groundwater recharge where the soil moisture can recharge aquifers and then feed flows into wetlands as well. So this is called blue water, and this is something that you can easily see, but groundwater, yes, maybe not. But these two types of surface water and groundwater that can be readily or can be accessible is regarded as blue water. And then the soil moisture and the transpiration that you get from the plants that absorb the soil moisture is called green water. And 60% of the atmospheric moisture comes from green water, and 40% of it comes from the blue water. So we used to think that the things or the activities that take place within our national jurisdiction is what really impacts our resources and our well-being. But as you can see, this atmospheric moisture flows all across the earth, and it connects all these different countries, communities, and also biodiversity as well, because some of these ecosystems also support a range of species, especially migratory birds and fish and etc. So there are certain countries that result in evapotranspiration or release atmospheric moisture to the air. And there are some of them that depend on this atmospheric moisture for precipitation on their land. So terrestrial atmospheric moisture results in about 50% of the terrestrial rainfall. So some of it comes from the land-based evaporation, so land-based moisture, atmospheric moisture, but the rest of it comes from land-based sources. Like I said, the soil and the canopy cover or the trees that absorb it, and also the wetland bodies, open wetland bodies that can also result in evaporation. And this way, this becomes a very complicated or a complex cycle where the management of certain resources within our land or within our country would be affecting the precipitation in another country. So similar way, vice versa, what happens in another country might be affecting us. So this is how the hydrological cycle really connects all these diverse geographic regions and, again, communities and different populations of species as well. So there are called net importers and exporters of terrestrial atmospheric moisture. So the exporters are the ones that usually have large forest covers. For example, you can see that Brazil, because of the Amazon rainforest, is a huge exporter of this moisture. And this is then helps other neighboring countries to gain precipitation in their own land as well. So Amazon tree forest cover actually is responsible for 36% of its own rainfall within that land. So it's huge. And some of the other countries depend or import this moisture as precipitation. So it's again, hydrological cycle then becomes a global common good, and usual arguments on national sovereignty that we should be only looking at what happens within our space. That argument is no longer valid because of this increasing evidence to show that everything is so interconnected. So now we know that wetlands and other ecosystems are so linked, and they also play a huge role in provisioning water. So other than that, there are numerous benefits that you get from wetlands, and I'm sure you are aware of ecosystem services, which translate into benefits that people gain from ecosystems like wetlands. So ecosystem services, the concept was introduced back in the 2005, and even before that it has been around, but officially endorsed because of the Millennium Ecosystem Service Assessment that started in 2005. And this was recognized as a concept that could make people value ecosystems more. But again, it's a very anthropocentric view, which we can talk about later, but it's basically saying that because we derive all these benefits from wetlands, we should protect them. So ecosystem services are divided into 4 categories. You have the provisioning services where you get direct freshwater, food, fiber, fuel, and minerals, clay and sand, medicinal or herbal plants, and also hydroelectricity like renewable energy. And then you have regulating services like air quality, where the pollution is minimized, and regulating local and global climate, reducing floods, erosion, storms, and also contributing to pollination services and noise and visual buffering. Then you have cultural ecosystem services, which play an important role in any context. And this really depends on the relationships people have with a certain ecosystem, in this case, wetlands. So how you're using it in terms of whether it's for recreation, tourism, whether you just enjoy the view and the scenery, the aesthetic value of it, whether it's connected to some spiritual or religious value, and whether it encompasses a cultural heritage, social relations, and also the value of it for educational research. And then you have the supporting services, which sometimes go unnoticed because it's not directly visible or obvious, but they also play a huge role in soil formation, photosynthesis or primary production, nutrient cycling, and habitat, and providing habitats for diverse species. So looking at wetland management, globally, there has been, of course, a significant focus on conserving wetlands and promoting wise use of wetlands. And this is, of course, driven by the Ramsar Convention. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the convention. It's one of the oldest treaties out there, one of the oldest multilateral environmental agreements out there. And it started in the 1970s, and the main focus at that point was to actually protect wetlands for waterfowl habitats, because they provided important habitats for a number of diverse avifaunal species. And that was the reason why. And at that time, during the agricultural revolution, there was a lot of draining or conversion of wetlands for agriculture, and also the wetlands were perceived as a threat in terms of breeding mosquitoes and whatnot. But now we know that healthy wetlands are essential, and they can also reduce threats from pests. So the Ramsar Convention is built on 3 different pillars. So one is reducing the threats to wetlands, and promoting wise use or sustainable use of wetlands. And then it's also there to build international cooperation among different countries. So looking at knowledge exchange of best practices, utilizing or pulling in resources, so on and so forth. And so far, 172 countries have signed the convention, and Sri Lanka signed it in 1990. And wetlands are interesting from the point of view that they are also the only ecosystem type to have their own intergovernmental treaty. And Ramsar has a very specific definition for what's identified as a wetland. So it's an area of marsh, fen, peatland, or water, whether natural or artificial, whether permanent or temporary, with water that is static or flowing, fresh, brackish, or salt, including areas of marine water, the depth of which at low tide does not exceed 6 meters. So in this sense, it really encompasses a wide range or wide typologies of wetlands. So you can, if we are to broadly categorize them, they can be categorized into 3 different types. You have the marine or coastal wetlands. With the coastal wetlands, of course, according to the Ramsar definition, the height of the water level or water column should be less than 6 meters. So you have coral reefs, mudflats, mangroves, salt marshes, coastal lagoons, estuaries, and then you have inland wetlands, inland freshwater wetlands, that could be either river floodplains, different types of wet grasslands or woodlands, lake marshes, or ponds, peatlands, caves, and then you also get the category of human-made wetlands or man-made wetlands, which can include aquaculture ponds, paddy fields, irrigated agriculture wetlands, pasture along river reservoirs like the 10,000 odd tanks that we have, and canals and streams as well, and artificial wetlands like the ones that are built for wastewater treatment, and parks with ponds. So it's a really wide array of wetland types that are out there, and as mentioned before, because 75% of Earth's surface cover is water, it's very likely that these types of wetlands exist everywhere to different extents. So Ramsar Convention has been driving a lot of the work related to wetland conservation, restoration, and wise use through World Wetlands Day celebrations. And this is something that has started in 1997. And around the world, many of the countries celebrate this and put a lot of effort into organizing this and mobilizing crowd to join. So even if you look at the strategic plan of the Ramsar, it's one of those activities that have gained progress as opposed to other activities. It's having World Wetlands Day in different countries is something that has been progressing quite well. So it recognizes that the governments are also understanding that World Wetlands Day is a really good way to educate people and to publicize the fact that wetlands are important. So there have been different themes over the years. So there have been different annual themes from looking at the connection between people and wetlands, and also a few different annual themes on wetlands and water, and looking at restoration recently. And this year's theme has been protecting wetlands for our common future. So the concept of our common future actually dates back to the 1980s, based on a report published by the World Commission on Environment and Development. This is known as the Brundtland Report, and this is one of those groundbreaking publications that first recognized and endorsed the concept of sustainable development. So it's been there since 1980s, and this sustainable development is defined as the development that meets the needs of the present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So a lot of time has passed since this, and there have been multiple efforts globally and locally to promote sustainable development and also conserve important ecosystems and species. Globally, there have been numerous conventions, global agreements, again, to foster cooperation between countries. And this is also recognizing that, as I mentioned, the hydrological cycle, that certain things are very much interconnected. So looking at just having management frameworks confined to national jurisdiction might not work. But you can see, again, the oldest is with Ramsar, and then there have been numerous conventions. More recently, in the 1990s, you have the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UNFCCC on climate change, and in 1994, the Convention to Combat Desertification. So this is all to reflect that there has been increasing recognition and efforts to promote sustainable development, to use natural resources wisely for the well-being of the economy, the society, the environment. And even locally, if you look at the legislation that we have very stringent legislation and acts to govern best practices when it comes to utilizing natural resources. So there are almost, this is a list that we produce, but there could be many more. There are almost close to 30 different legislation governing different aspects of the environment. And in addition to that, there are numerous policies and plans in place to govern natural resource management as well. But even with all this effort, we still see a decline in wetlands at a rate of 1.6%, which is 3 times faster than rainforests. And then we know that Anthropocene has introduced threats that disproportionately affect wetland ecosystems. You can see this from the drop in freshwater species, which has fallen by 85% since 1970, followed by terrestrial and marine species. When it comes to local wetlands, one thing is that we don't know a lot about all the different types of wetlands we have and their distribution, their extent. We know more about some of our urban wetlands because of the key role that they play in especially protecting us from floods. But across the country, there can be many other diverse, smaller scale wetlands distributed, but we don't know much about it. We at IWMI, and there's also a lot of effort from the government as well, to understand urban wetlands like Colombo wetlands more. And this also was a consequence of the 2010 floods, which resulted in a catastrophic damage, especially with a 1% GDP loss, which is quite high for a country that's experiencing about 4 to 5% of annual GDP growth. And that's when there was a lot of concentration and focus on protecting the Colombo wetlands. And through efforts from state agencies, NGOs, there has been a lot done over the years from 2010 onwards to really identify which wetlands should be protected, and also getting local and international recognition. So you know that Ramsar got Colombo got accredited as a Ramsar city in 2018. And this is all due to this collective effort and understanding that these urban wetlands should be protected. And we know they also deliver a wide range of of ecosystem services, especially making the city more livable. So with the infrastructure and the housing that we have, if not for the wetlands, it would have been a very, very hot city. So reducing extreme air temperatures, regulating pollution are all vital ecosystem services that we benefit from without knowing. And it's also good to highlight that even though the wetland extent is very small, it's about 19 square kilometers, it provides habitats to a large number of species. So it's a city that's rich in biodiversity. Studies that have been conducted in 2015, 2016 have recorded almost more than 250 plant species and 280 species of animals. And some of them are either threatened, critically endangered, or endemic, so have a high conservation significance as well. And we know that a lot of people also benefit from these walking tracks and jogging paths that are constructed around wetlands, so they provide recreational benefits as well. So at IWMI, during a Darwin-funded project that was from 2020 to 2023, I want to say, but it's pretty recent, and we wanted to find out how Colombo wetlands are doing, and this is especially based on the fact that as part of the accreditation process as well, and identifying the value, estimating the value of these wetlands, there were numerous studies that were conducted to support the development of the Metro Colombo wetland management strategy, which was developed in 2016, right before the Ramsar accreditation was gained. And since then, 2016 to 2021, when this project started, or 2020, when this project started, we wanted to see how well we have done in terms of the progress. We have identified certain strategic areas and activities under this strategy, and we wanted to know whether these still there's some improvement, and where are the areas that require additional support or focus. So as part of it, we conducted some surveys, and we surveyed a range of stakeholders, including stakeholders or government agencies that work on wetlands, as well as researchers, NGOs, and experts, just to see what do they value in terms of ecosystem services when it comes to wetlands. So many of them valued cooling, the thermal regulation, and flood prevention. So almost 90 to 91% of them said these are the most valuable ecosystem services provided by Colombo wetlands. This is followed by recreation and aesthetic ecosystem services, and then you get different water regulation and nutrient cycling, and the services on the recreational services on education and water filtering, so pollution regulation and etc. So as I said, one of the main purpose of this survey was to see how well we are doing since this strategy was developed. So some of the questions were asked to understand how people, the respondents, perceive the current state of wetlands and the trend in the state of wetlands and the overall change since 2016. So current status, more than 50% of the respondents said that the current state of wetlands within the Colombo wetland complex is poor. And then they've said, when it comes to the extent of wetlands, this is what I meant is the trend in the extent of wetlands within Colombo wetland complex. And they've said that this has decreased. So almost 60% of the respondents believe that the extent of the wetlands have diminished over time. And since specifically when looking at 2016, again, 43% said that either it's deteriorated, and some of them said it has deteriorated greatly. So one thing to note is these are perception studies, and this really depends on a lot of factors because these are people responding to questionnaires, and we don't take into consideration their baseline knowledge, what their background is, and whether they have any sort of biases. So these, of course, these are results that should be read cautiously, but it does give an overall idea of where we are, the trajectory of Colombo wetlands. And when looking at like deterioration and connecting it to threats, the main threats that was identified were solid waste dumping and landfilling for infrastructure development, water pollution, invasive alien species, and agricultural runoff, and also political interventions. And these are not so unexpected because if you go around the country, even around Colombo, you will see many of these threats. So you can see from top right, clockwise, this is in Calpetia. So you can see some areas where mangroves have been removed for aquaculture ponds, and probably know during 1980s or early 1990s, there was a huge expansion of shrimp farming in Sri Lanka, but then later many of these were abandoned due to spread of diseases and water pollution. And this land that's remaining is highly infertile, cannot be used for any other economic activity except for constructing salt pans. Like you can't grow anything in there because the soil formation and the nutrients have been drained and the soil structure is damaged. And then this is in Colombo, in Corte, where you can see some landfilling for infrastructure. And in the middle, this is near the Crow Island river, the Kalani River mouth. So there are constant beach cleanup programs, especially that happens there because it's a river mouth. And this is the amount of garbage that was collected in one instance within an hour or so. And these happen all the time. Crow Island actually has a beach society that does these cleanups, but there's so much that's been generated and getting accumulated at that river mouth that it's almost resource intensive to actually do these cleanups and have any sort of significant impact. And then this is again Gotatua in the left top corner, which has a lot of invasive alien species spreading, and this is a common occurrence in many of the Colombo wetlands. And in Talatugoda, you can see a water body with algal blooms. So all of these nutrients get washed off into these water bodies, causing eutrophication, and sometimes it might get so severe that leads to diminished oxygen and fish kills. So as part of the previous project that we also conducted the surveys, which is called Increasing the Resilience of Biodiversity and Livelihoods in Colombo's Wetlands, we conducted this in partnership with a number of state agencies, including Central Environment Authority, Department of Wildlife Conservation, Urban Development Authority, Sri Lanka Land Development Corporation, Biodiversity Secretariat, Field Ornithology Group of Sri Lanka. And we picked about 8 to 10 communities across the Colombo Wetland Complex, and these were based on a number of criteria. So how diverse are they in terms of wetland types, and their importance for flood storage, importance for biodiversity, level of threat and degradation, and whether there's a real community interest and engagement, and the land ownership, and also a number of projects already being conducted in that area, and ease of access. So based on that, these are the sites that were identified. So we have Kolonava, Madinagoda, Hiinala, Badagana, Madivilla, Kimbulawala, Kottawa, and Mulleriava. And what we did was we engaged with these communities to develop participatory videos. So this is a process that involves a group of community members in creating their own films by identifying what are the real issues pertaining to the natural resources or the environment where they live, and getting a sense of what is important and how they want to be represented, what issues should be highlighted, and also bring together different members of the community and their views and ideas on a particular issue. So in this case, a wetland-based issue, and also identify a solution on their own, which is not relying on external resources. So participatory videos, in a sense, make people think about and articulate what the problems are when it comes to, let's say, environmental pollution or wetland management, and also think about what they can do as a community, as an individual, to lessen the burden of that issue and help communicate these in a very clear way. So we had a number of guiding questions for the communities to think about, because sometimes some of these community members are not even aware of the fact that they are living close to a wetland, or there's a wetland adjacent to them. Sometimes when you ask them the question of, do you know that you're living in a wetland, and what is a wetland? Their mind immediately goes just to the Ramsar sites in Sri Lanka, which is something that we are trying to change, because wetlands are everywhere. So we talk about, we give a description of what are wetlands, what are ecosystem services, and then let them identify the different types of wetlands around them, and then talk about why they're important to them, what are the challenges around wetlands and wetland management, and what are some of the solutions that the community can produce. And we make sure that some of these solutions that are developed and identified by the communities are developed by the communities for the communities without having a significant influence from external stakeholders or external resources. So looking at these different wetland sites and the communities in these sites, so they value the wetlands differently. Some of them think that flood retention is the main ecosystem service that they value, or that's why wetlands are important to them. Some of them might think it's the biodiversity or the clean air, or it's because they grow paddy, for example. So you get to understand that although we are looking at a representative sample of these wetlands communities, they value the benefits provided by wetlands very differently. And this also tells the nature of the relationship that they have. For example, if it's something that their livelihood depends on, for paddy or fishing or using medicinal plants, then it's a different relationship with when you compare it with someone who just goes there for a walk or a jog, or for clean air, for aesthetic beauty. So understanding these diverse relationship people have with wetlands are also important if you're having contextualized solutions that are beneficial for the local communities and are also sustainable in the long term. So this is a complex diagram, but it's basically saying that what are the different issues that were identified by these different communities, and what are the solutions that they came up with, and how some of these solutions are also very common among some of the sites, but also some are different. And we also wanted to see how many of them have actually implemented the solution on their own. And it was only 2 communities, and Muleriava community only has partially implemented. So their solution was to increase awareness and have more educational programs. And the CBO, or the community-based organization that we were interacting with, has already conducted some programs, but not to a very impactful extent. But if you're looking at Kulonava that mentioned or identified pollution or solid waste as a huge problem, they themselves came up with a solution to work with the municipal council and find a way to segregate waste and have an eco-fair where some of this waste are bought back for some monetary value. And Kota brings in a different case study or an example where, because it's a pretty paddy-dominated wetland site, it was about reviving some of these abandoned paddy land, and this involved the agrarian department working with the farming community and also engaging with the irrigation department to restore and clean up some of the canals, and also motivate the paddy farmers to take up farming again, because there are numerous challenges when it comes to taking up paddy in urban lands as well. So yeah, that's an example of restoration activity that happened collectively to ensure wetland conservation and management. I won't go into this example video because they're about 8 to 10 minutes long, and we developed a number of videos like this from each of these communities. And this is a Kulonava community talking about why the wetland is important for them, and what the issue was, again, about the garbage, and how they collectively came up with the solution to have an eco-fair where they segregated waste and had a buyback scheme. So this is what the wetland video, the participatory video was about, and we developed a range of videos like this for each of the wetland communities, and we also showed them to the state entities as well. So it was kind of like a video mediated dialogue between communities and state agencies to understand what the issues are pertaining to these wetland sites, and whether there's a solution that can be co-developed between the stakeholders or the policymakers and the communities. Okay, I will not go there. But looking at protecting wetlands for a common future, there's a lot to be done. And one of the main things is recognizing the value of wetlands, again, identifying where they are and the services that they provide, and looking at all these different types of wetlands that are within your area, and try to understand their ecology and also how they benefit the local communities. And we must address the root cause of wetland degradation and loss. So this is basically reducing the conversion of wetlands to other land uses, and having this cost-benefit analysis of decisions when there are wetlands involved, and taking individual actions to reduce pollution in terms of reducing wastewater release, solid waste dumping, and littering. And because addressing root cause of wetland loss and degradation also comes with prioritizing conservation, because restoring degraded wetlands, although that's the option now that we are left with, because much of the wetlands globally and locally are degraded. So there's a need to identify and prioritize wetlands for restoration, and looking at different funding and resourcing opportunities, and collaborating and building partnerships. And as individuals, there's a role that we all can play, because this is not just on state agencies. Individually and community-wise, we all have a role, and there's a need to take responsibility for our own action as well. And it's very clear that our relationship with nature is broken, because regardless of decades of efforts to improve the health of ecosystems for the society and for the environment, we are still going down that path of losing wetland ecosystems, where the species are going extinct and also communities are being affected. So current economic models do not adequately consider our embeddedness in nature. And one of the reasons for this is because nature is usually dynamic. It's always moving and it's invisible. So the soil microbes that play a huge role and other ecosystem processes cannot be observed, and nature is silent. So because of this, we tend to think that economies and human societies and nature are these three different spheres that are interconnected in one way. But in reality, it's that the societies and economies are embedded in nature. So there's a need for a new perspective, looking at ecosystems as a whole and valued for their own worth rather than for the benefits of the humans. So this is where rights of nature in wetlands comes in. So this is a global movement to shift this focus from looking at ecosystem management or conservation for the purpose of humans and for the benefit of the humans. We believe that nature and its all constituent elements, the biotic and the abiotic features, have an intrinsic value and therefore have fundamental rights. So intrinsic value can be defined as something, the value of something, regardless of its utility for humans. So it doesn't, it's really a principle to understand and realize that all ecosystem components, whether they're living or non-living, so abiotic or abiotic, they all have a right to exist and be free from pollution and free from degradation and etc. So it can be a legal, it's not just a legal model, but it's also a moral model. It's based on ethics as well. So which consider that humans are no longer the superior or dominant species, but they live within all these other members of the ecosystem as well. So we are only 1 out of the 9 billion species out there. So this really requires us to look beyond that human-centric viewpoint or anthropocentric viewpoint to towards a more ecocentric view. So this is not a novel concept. It has been embedded in many of our religions. When it comes to all religions, there's some form of mentioning of our deep connection with the earth, with the environment, and how we should be considering for the living beings as well. And there are many countries, especially from the South America, that have already adopted it. There are many indigenous and tribal communities that value these ecosystems and regard them as almost living beings. So operationalizing rights of nature and wetlands can be done in few different ways. There are so many interventions, but this really also require a behavioral and a system change. It has to be accepted morally before it becomes becomes integrated into law. So it can be a range of interventions from individual practice, from community action to legal frameworks, and then the more high-level governance structures. So people tend to think that human rights and rights of nature are two separate things, but they're not. They're very much interrelated because humans are part of nature. So if you are recognizing and protecting rights of nature, you are also protecting the rights of humans as well. Our right to clean, safe water, our right to shelter, all of that are protected if we also value and protect rights of nature as well. So our common future on wetlands is built on partnerships. This is not something that can be done alone. And there's, as I mentioned, there's a responsibility vested within the state, especially when it comes to improve land use planning, policy integration, strengthening enforcement, and incentivizing sustainable use. And civil society, the NGOs, the CBOs, the CSOs, for advocacy, building an evidence base, education, empowerment, and promoting informed choices. And youth have a very big role to play in terms of showing interest and really being motivated, and they can be the champions of driving this change. So advocacy, activism, volunteerism are all very important. And private sector, they have a huge role to play in terms of financing and investment, and recognizing that the economies are really dependent on nature as well. And promoting collaboration again, and transparency and accountability are really important. What are the risks from the economic activities? How are they minimized? And promoting wetland sensitive practices. So all of that in combination can really help drive change towards a world where wetlands are valued and conserved. I think that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening in, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chaturangi, for that amazing lecture with such wonderful visuals. I think we can open the floor now for questions. Please unmute and ask your question, or if you prefer, you could type it out in the chat.
Yeah,
box.
can I ask a
Yes.
question?
Yes, Dr. Malik.
Thank you, Chatu, for that interesting talk. You were dealing mostly with Colombo. Are there any similar initiatives in other parts of Sri Lanka regarding wetlands and their protection and investigations?
Hi, Dr. Malik. Thank you for the question. From IWMI's end, we do have a project where we're looking at it's a peri-urban area again. So it's a wetland complex in Gampa district. So again, the reason why we're looking at it is because its importance in flood regulation, not because we really want to know the biodiversity or understand ecology more, but basically to understand and value ecosystem services. But in a sense, it also provides stakeholders with information to make informed decisions, especially when it comes to land use planning. But as far as we know, IWMI, we're looking specifically at wetlands in Colombo and in this Gampa district. But at catchment level, there's so much work that's been done, but not looking at wetlands in an isolation. And then we also know there are sporadic studies, standalone studies focusing on different wetlands. Again, these tend to be important Ramsar sites rather than other generic wetland ecosystems.
Thank you.
May I ask a question? Have any studies, or what is the status of Muthurajavala at the moment, Muthurajavala swamped wetlands?
As far as I know, Professor Inoka, I think last time Mr. Manjula from the Department of Wildlife Conservation said that they're trying to get Muthurajavala declared as a Ramsar site, which gives it huge recognition locally and internationally. But other than that, we don't really work so much on Muthurajavala wetlands. But it's definitely an important site, and I think it's also one of the only peatlands in Sri Lanka. So it's interesting in that sense, and definitely need to be looked at, and maybe this can be a study for us to look into in the future.
If I may ask a question, I think several cities like Singapore, London, and I'm sure many European cities have managed to clean up their waterways and make them like recreational areas and so on. How close are we to coming to that situation?
I think it requires a significant overhaul in how we discharge wastewater. Because without having proper facilities to discharge wastewater, I think everything ends up either through contamination of groundwater or directly being released to water bodies. And cleaning up would not make sense unless we also address the root cause of it. The fundamental issue is that there's a lot of nutrients and contaminants and pollutants that are being discharged to these waterways, and cleaning up it itself would not help. But we need to address the root cause, that's having facilities to clean up this water before it enters the waterways.
So basically, they are being used as sewers.
Yes, sometimes I think we can safely say that some housing will not have that sanitation facilities to treat it and then release it, so they directly release it to these water bodies. And although this is something that needs to be regulated by the local authorities, I think it has not been enforced efficiently enough. And given that there's a lot of demand for housing, I think these things go unnoticed.
Can't we set up a decent sewer system?
It's a huge investment, and I think, and I don't know whether we are too late to do that, because it will require really looking at these wastewater systems that all the houses in Colombo would have. And yeah, I think it's significant effort and investment that's required, but definitely something that can be done if there's political will.
Thank you, Chaturangi.
Hello, Dr. Chaturangi, I found your lecture very, very interesting. I was personally, what intrigued me was your slide on operationalizing rights of nature wetlands. And I noticed that in South Asia, there are two countries, Bangladesh and India, but I don't see Sri Lanka there. Is there any efforts in Sri Lanka, to promote this discourse about, looking at the rights of nature? Has there been any discussion in this regard?
Yes, absolutely. This was initiated under the previous government. Actually, there's a policy that's being developed by the Ministry of Environment called National Policy on Living Entities. It's under development, so it's not finalized yet. But the aim is to recognize that some of these biotic and abiotic components within nature have their own rights and have a legal standing, and recognizing the intrinsic value of it. So yes, there's government-led initiatives to advance this. But of course, there's a lot more to be figured out, because when it comes to like having legal frameworks to implement this, there's a lot to be thought through. Whether are we looking at all natural resources within the country, or are we making it very specific for an ecosystem? For example, in Bangladesh, it was for Tarunga River or something, and even for India, it was Ganges and some other rivers. So they have identified separate distinct ecosystems to give rights to, and we have to figure out whether we want to do the same. Are we going at a constitutional change where we're looking at the whole country, and whether we're going to have legal personhood, and who's going to be that person who is going to speak on behalf of these ecosystems? How are we going to select them? And there's a lot more to be thought through, but the first step is that there's a government-led initiative to recognize intrinsic value of nature.
Yeah, and maybe just as a follow-up question, when you look at the countries that have adopted this approach, do you see because I feel this is, it's very philosophical, and therefore I feel it kind of changes the whole approach itself. So has it been very effective? If you take this as a as a control factor in comparison with the countries that don't have a more human dominant approach, do you think is there a marked difference?
I think it will make a marked difference if this concept was adopted more by developed countries, to be honest. Right now, it's a lot of the developing countries that have recognized this, but it will make a very significant change if other Western countries also adopt this and recognize this. But I mean, there are isolated case studies where it has been successful, and many of these come from court rulings. So it's looking at public litigation and then looking at how having something of this nature, it doesn't even have to be within the law. There are instances where judges have just used this principle or concept to validate the fact that the environment has been damaged.
Thank you.
I have another question. Recently, we saw some smog in the atmosphere in Colombo, and the speculation was that it was coming from India. Would you care to comment on that?
I'm so sorry that I have not really looked into it, but and especially not this specific instance, but in previous, I think there's a pattern. So it's mainly to do with the wind direction, but again, I'm not entirely sure what the exact cause of this problem is. And yeah. But like I said, everything, just like the hydrological cycle, these pollutant movements are also very much interconnected. So what's happening in one country is now impacting another.
Yeah. May I ask a question, or rather ask you to comment on what I have to say?
Sure.
Yeah. It's like this. Now, this has turned out, to find the solution to some kind of problem which has arisen, and we go on and on in a circular way. So should we really even consider human rights, or should we not consider human wrongs and enforcement rather than human rights? We have no rights, actually. Why should we have rights? Your comments, please.
This is it's a good observation. I think it is very much accepted that that we have adequate regulations and legislation, but they're not enforced to a certain extent, and humans have to play a role in it. And I see sometimes one thing is that lack of resources is a major hindrance to enforce these legislations and regulations. But also it's sometimes the political influence is so much, or the greed for it is so much, that this surpass the actual enforcement. And that's when this rights of nature can come into play, because it's really understanding that you should not be only thinking about yourself, but you also need to shift that mindset to consider others in the environment as well. I don't know whether I answered that question, but from the state agencies, because we work so much with them, it's always come down to the lack of resources and capacity to implement and enforce these laws.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we are always in a bind, but I don't agree that we should enforce rights, rather than we should tackle our wrongs.
Yeah. And we have necessary legislative frameworks for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you
agree.
very much, Chaturangi. I know that it appears that this is not the very first time you're making this presentation. You must have done it many times over. And have you got any feedback? Has it made a difference?
I honestly don't know. I mean, as researchers and also practitioners, I must say, because we do work quite a lot with the government, we try to make an impact and have a balanced approach. And sometimes it's very difficult to evaluate our impact as well. So, for example, I mean, when you ask the question, has it worked? I could have confidently said it has worked if the wetland extent has not reduced, or people don't think that that it's not in a bad state, but it's the opposite. And like I said, even though these are perceptions and it's what personal views of people, it's still kind of disheartening. But I think at IWMI we also want to do a quantitative analysis and see whether, because there has been considerable amount of effort that has been put forward by a lot of stakeholders and parties to, at least for Colombo wetlands. So we would like to have a technical evaluation to see whether the at least the extent has not reduced since 2016. That's our wish. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you.
that discussion, and Chaturangi for your excellent answers. I'll just call on Dr. Malik Fernando to thank the speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Inoka. There was a hand up. Would it be possible to go back? There was a hand raised. Dirukshan. Dirukshan, are you still ready?
Yes. I was going to ask a very kind of pragmatic kind of question, actually. We often see these, beach cleanup efforts and so on, and it's horrifying to see, the huge volume of, plastic waste. I've always wondered what happens to that. What happens after a cleanup, in a water body or beach or whatever. Once that is clean, I know that is a very tiny quantity compared to what is actually out there, but what happens to that?
Simply they're segregated. So the PET bottles, of course, can be recycled, and there are very well established centers and companies that will come and collect it. But it's what happens to the rest of it, because certain types of plastic cannot be recycled. And then you have like paper and the wrappers and all of that, which again end up in a landfill, because it's usually the municipal council or the Pradesh Sabha that comes and takes it away, and they're disposed just like a normal household waste. So it goes into a landfill, which
Okay,
is the sad reality. Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry, I have a quick question for Dr. Chaturangi. It's similar to what Shireen asked, if I may ask that. It's regarding your actually your slide on destruction to the these wetlands. On the mangrove areas that have been removed, mangrove areas removed for aquaculture farming, and also landfill, unauthorized landfill. Are there special regulations to stop this? Because I've actually seen some of it happening and taken photographs, but I was told that it was due to, political intervention. But is there any regulations that say that these are not allowed? Because it's very disheartening to see this. So I just wanted to find out.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a private land, then of course it's beyond the control of a regulating body. But if it's within with the Colombo wetland complex and it comes under one of the state agencies, then there are definitely regulations on what can be done and what cannot be done. And in terms of aquaculture farms, I believe there are no regulations as such. I mean, general regulations when it comes to project development would apply here in terms of like doing an environmental impact assessment and blah, blah, blah. But it's identifying the locations for aquaculture farms that becomes imperative here.
But can they remove mangroves like that for that kind of development? Is that, allowed?
That's the thing. It's looking at where the site is, or the project site location is for this aquaculture farm. And then, of course, again, if it's a private land, then it's beyond the regulating bodies control. Although you nevertheless have to do an environmental impact assessment or an IEE, initial environmental examination, if it's less than a certain hectares of area of development, and then you have to identify the risks and how you're going to mitigate those risks. And
So it
then
will further reduce, it will further reduce the coverage of the wetlands, isn't it? The percentage of coverage when you do
yeah,
that.
I mean, if it's targeting a wetland area, a mangrove area, certainly it will. So it's up to the Central Environment Authority to really look at the pros and cons of that sort of development and give approval based on that.
Okay, right. Thank you. And finally, you showed us a map of the urban mangrove areas in Colombo. Where can we get a map of that?
These are not actually mangrove areas. These are freshwater bodies.
Sorry, wetland
Yes,
area.
wetland areas. I think the ownership, the data ownership must be with SLDC or Urban Development Authority, but there should be a map available online as well. If not, I can share it with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent presentation.
Thank you, Chatu, for that very interesting and wide-ranging talk. You took us through water, how it comes, how it goes, what it does, and also the services that it provides. So this talk has been rather different from our usual naturalist public lectures, that are based on a particular species and some animals. I hope that we will be able to have similar environment-based talks in the future, not restricted just to a particular plant or animal species. In fact, I'm at the moment trying to arrange a talk about the Jaffna lagoons and problems of the Jaffna lagoons, which again is part of the wetlands. And I asked the question whether there is any work that is being done in other parts of the country regarding preservation of wetlands, because every now and again we hear about people encroaching onto the banks of irrigation reservoirs, for instance. There was a time when it was converting paddy fields has been banned, but now we even see paddy fields being filled up for building purposes. Anyway, once more, thank you very much for taking the time to do this presentation for us. And I hope we'll be able to have you again sometime in the future on a similar topic. Thank you, Chatu.
Thank you, Dr. Malik and everyone. That was very interesting. Thank you for inviting me.